on finance, so I was actually invited in as an expert consultant on how to write the rules of the game. And they knew how to use aircraft carriers and B-2 bombers and amphibious invasions, but no one knew how to use stocks, bonds, and derivatives to fight a war. So the rules were you could not use any kinetic weapons, means nothing that would shoot or explode. You could only use stocks, bonds, currencies, and derivatives. And we had teams. There was a Russia team, a China team, a United States team, and then we had sort of Europe and Switzerland, the hedge funds all lumped in together. And then there were referees. So we were given certain scenarios. You would make a move. You would announce it. The other teams would react. We had separate rooms for our capitals, so we could go back. I was on the China team, so we went back to Beijing, which was a certain room that was our capital. And we played it over 2 days, and it was fascinating. My object was to, in order to help the United States, I actually wanted to attack the United States as hard as we could in order to teach our own military and intelligence community what the threats were. You're trying to help America by showing the vulnerabilities of America. So that's what we did. And I actually cooked up a little plot with a friend of mine who was on the Russia team. And China and Russia combined forces and combined their gold and announced a new gold-backed currency using UK banks and Swiss depositories. And what they said is, from now on, if you want Chinese exports or Russian natural resources, we will no longer accept dollars. You must pay us in this new gold-backed currency that we sponsor, as a way to kind of get the United States to, to think hard about the vulnerabilities of the dollar. It's a fascinating exercise. It's all described in the book. I hope the readers enjoy it. But it was a deadly serious gambit by the Pentagon to understand how financial war could play out.
You also mentioned, I want to talk about a tweet that you've left in the last day or so, again on the special drawing rights. You said, you tweeted that the G20 will go to the special drawing right before they go to gold, and then gold is the last resort. Walk us through that, Jim.
Sure. I mean, the thing is, central banks and the international monetary elite, represented by the G20 leaders, the IMF, and then the central bank heads and finance ministers around the world, just to be clear, they hate gold. Now, they have it. The U.S. has not sold any gold since 1980, and Europe's been holding on to their gold. So the people with gold are hanging on to it, but they actually hate it. They would prefer fiat currency because they can manipulate expectations, they can manipulate people. People who are kind of in on the game can hedge themselves with, things like gold, land, fine art, other types of hard assets. Warren Buffett bought a railroad. That's the ultimate hard asset. So the insiders can protect themselves. The people who lose are average citizens. So people saving in a bank account, people with retirement savings, annuities, insurance policies, anything that's sort of denominated in nominal dollars that's not going to go up with inflation, they're the victims. So this is a sort of organized theft from taking money from average people, giving it to the elites who know how the game is played. So that's why they like paper money. And when they get over indebted, which they are now, Europe cannot pay its debt. There's not enough money in the world to fill the hole in the European balance sheet. But what you can do is print some SDRs and hand them out, just like candy at Halloween. Here comes China, here comes Italy, here comes France. Here's some SDRs, kids, and go have a good time. That's actually it sounds like I'm being frivolous, Max. I'm being very serious. That is how SDRs work. They're not backed up by anything. They are handed out by the IMF. They do count as reserves. When the SDRs came out in the late 60s and the 70s, they were actually called paper gold. Now, that's one of the great oxymorons of all time, but that was the nickname for them when they came out. They were called paper gold. So that would be the elite's preferred route. But my view is that you'll be able to keep it going a little longer with SDRs, but eventually it will go critical. People will lose confidence across the board. At that point, they will go to gold, not because they want to, but because they have to.
Right, and in the book Currency Wars by James G. Rickards, there's also some great analysis of systems analysis. Because we're kind of almost in a post-economics world. We're in a world run by systems theory and systems analysis. And if you bring in an SDR, for example, and you try to roll up all the existing debt into a new currency and a new bond market, you're just adding exponentially more debt to the system, which actually increases the risk of chaos exponentially above that. But in the minute left, I wanted to cover something here, which is I just came back from the Kilkenomics Economics Festival in Ireland, and we're talking about gold. And of course, the thing you hear all the time is, well, there's not enough gold for there to be a gold standard. And I know you have some thoughts on that, Jim Rickards.
Sure. I've actually I'm working on a piece called the 10 the 10 things that everybody believes about gold that are not true. In other words, there's so many sort of falsehoods or canards or sort of cliche responses from the anti-gold people. But look, people say there's not enough gold to support world trade. There's always enough gold. It's just a question of price. There is not enough gold at $1,700 an ounce, but there's plenty of gold at $7,000 an ounce. So the point is, it's not about the quantity of gold, it's about the price you choose to back up the money supply. And this is another very serious point. This was the blunder in 1925. In 1925, in the wake of World War I and the Weimar hyperinflation and reparations and all the problems, the world wanted to go back onto the gold standard. Now, Winston Churchill insisted that they go back at the pre-World War I price, which was about $20.67 an ounce in U.S. dollars and £4, little more than £4 in terms of UK sterling. He felt it was the honorable thing to do. Probably his motivations were right, but it was an enormous blunder because so much paper money had been printed during World War I that to go back on the gold standard at the pre-World War I price, you had to take the money supply in England down by 50%. Well, England was in a depression 10 years before the rest of the world. That was highly deflationary. Later in his memoirs, Churchill said that was the worst mistake he ever made. And this was the guy who orchestrated Gallipoli, so he had a couple of mistakes in addition to all his great achievements. So the answer is, it's not just when you go back on the gold standard, you have to think really hard about the price. In 1925, if they had said maybe $50 an ounce instead of $20 an ounce, that might have been mildly inflationary and we might have avoided the Great Depression. Now, ever since, economists have disparaged gold and marginalized gold and said, well, look, just look at the 1920s, you can see it failed. Well, it did fail in the 1920s, but not because of gold, but because of the price. So when you go back to the gold standard, you've got to get the price right. That's why I recommend actually a commission to study this and make some recommendations. I give a range of values in the book. I don't want to put a stake in the ground over a certain value, Max. I've got the low end about $3,000 an ounce, and at the high end, $44,000 an ounce. And these are not made up numbers. They're all just very simple math ratios of gold quantities to money quantities. For example, do you use M0? Do you use M1? Do you use M2? Do you use all the gold in the world or just the official gold? If you're using official gold, is it just ECB, China, and the U.S., or do we count other countries as well? These are important questions. I don't pretend to have all the right answers, but I know the questions, and they have to be studied. So getting the price right is really important. So when people say there's not enough gold, that's nonsense. It's a question of price. Jim Rickards, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report. Thank you, Max. All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, James G. Rickards. The book is called Currency Wars. You can follow Mr. Rickards on Twitter at James G. Rickards as well. Pick up this book. And you can follow me on Twitter at Keiser Report or on Facebook. And you can send me an email at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.